All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me this evening. My name is Max Matcham, and I'm the Natural Heritage Education Coordinator at the Oak Ridges Moraine Land Trust. I'm the person who leads a lot of the guided walks and activities with the Land Trust. And recently I started uh, being in charge of the volunteer program here at the Land Trust as well. So I'm still fairly new to this position, but really excited to get to work with so many volunteers with this organization. I will start with just a brief introduction to about what the Land Trust is and the kind of work that we do with a land acknowledgement, and then I'll go into my presentation about some of the volunteer opportunities we have at the Land Trust, and then there will be a period at the end of the presentation in which you can ask any questions that you may have. So I will share my screen again and start chatting a little bit about work that we do. All right, so thank you for joining us today. I'd like to begin with our land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that Indigenous peoples have had and continue to have presence and deep connection with the lands on and near the Oak Ridges Moraine, part of what is known to Indigenous peoples of North America as Turtle Island. These lands are the meeting place of two treaties, the lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit and those of the Chippewas of Georgina Island, Rama, and Beausoleil, and the Mississaugas of Alderville, Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Scugog Island, which are the First Nations of the Williams Treaty. We would like to thank them and other Indigenous peoples for sharing this land with us. We acknowledge that Indigenous peoples have been subject to colonial oppression and injustice, which continues to this day. We acknowledge that the first step to reconciliation is recognizing Indigenous people and their inherent rights to the land. We will continue to create a better future for our relationship with Indigenous peoples and the land. The Oak Ridges Moraine Land Trust endeavors to honor the land and its treaties by ensuring healthy ecosystems that thrive forever. And we recognize that working together with Indigenous peoples to include ecological traditional knowledge systems moves us forward towards an equitable and sustainable future. So I'll start by talking a little bit about what a land trust is. So land trusts are a type of nonprofit charitable organization. We can acquire land outright, or we can acquire interests in land with things like conservation easements, which we'll talk a little bit about during the presentation. We'll sort of go over a lot of the same stuff in just a second here. Land trusts raise money to purchase land or easements, and we protect the ecological features of these properties. And we receive donations of lands, and we are required by law to protect these places in perpetuity. So we can't change our mind after you donate your land to us in 10 years and decide to put up a condo. We are required by law to protect the ecological features of these places forever. So how do we protect the moraine? We contribute to the federal government's goal of protecting 30% of land by 2030. We connect people with nature. Part of that is the volunteer program, which we're talking about tonight, and all the educational work that we do, the outreach. We support climate change resiliency, protect green corridors, and we protect land on the moraine. One of the avenues that we're able to do this through is something called the Ecological Gifts Program. It's something that Revenue Canada has, where if you're a landowner, you can get some really wonderful tax breaks for donating your land or putting a conservation easement on your land with an organization like the Oak Ridges Moraine Land Trust. And legacy giving is a really big part of how we run our organization as well. We have a lot of stuff donated to us. One thing that we're working on right now, a really exciting project, is the Kirtland's Warbler Habitat Restoration Project. So right now in Northumberland County, we have two sites within about 500 meters of each other, 250 meters of each other, which we are restoring to this oak pine savanna habitat to try to attract this endangered songbird called the Kirtland's Warbler, and benefit all sorts of other species as well, things like the red-headed woodpecker, the common nighthawk, American bumblebee, monarch, all these other species, grasshopper, sparrow, will benefit from this habitat restoration as well. So we're doing things like organizing events, organizing webinars, in-field training sessions to try to encourage people to collect the seeds from native plants so we can use them at this restoration site. And that's something we're going to talk a little bit about during this presentation as well. So we have a lot of amazing events coming up over the next little while. We have a bunch of really fun webinars. This is one that we just announced recently, the Winter Finch webinar. We can learn about things like crossbills and evening grosbeaks and all these other finches that sometimes appear in this part of the world in the wintertime. That's going to be on February 4th with someone from the Finch Research Network. We have a presentation on groundwater in the Oak Ridges Moraine coming up on February 11th. I'm going to be leading one about animal courtship. It's sort of a Valentine's special. It comes up on February 13th. We have a winter wildlife guided walk on Saturday, March 1st here in Schaumburg at our Maple Cross Nature Reserve, which is one of the places where we have a lot of our events. And if you volunteer with us, there's a good chance that you'll get to visit out there and do some work out there at some point. And we're also doing a webinar on the reintroductions of this endangered butterfly called the mottled dusky wing. Um, that is on March 12th. And then we have way out in April on the 26th, we have a spring ephemeral wildflower guided walk. So we have a lot of really cool stuff happening over the next few months and the next few weeks. And hopefully I'll see some of you at some of these webinars and some of these events. All right. So let me hop on to my other presentation here. This is the volunteer training and orientation session 2025 of the Oak Ridges Moraine Land Trust. So that's a picture from a moth night that we had this past summer at that same place in Schaumburg, the Maple Cross Nature Reserve. Um, and it's worth noting that most of our properties are not open to the public. We have one property, the Beaton Heritage Forest in Beaton, Ontario, that's open for visitors. And we have a few properties that we co-manage or co-own, like Nobleton Tract in Nobleton, Ontario, that are open to the public. But most of our protected properties, most of them are easements, so people might still be living on their land. But even our nature reserves, which we own outright or had people donate to us, most of those aren't open to the public. But if you volunteer with us, you can have access to some of those places. So that's a nice perk. So we're going to start off by asking, what is the Oak Ridges Moraine? It's this big landform, and you can see it extends from Peel all the way out to Northumberland. It's down on the south side of Rice Lake there, and it goes all the way out to the west of Bolton there, almost all the way to Brampton. And it sort of meets up there with the Niagara Escarpment. So it was formed about 13,000 years ago by the retreating glaciers at the end of the Wisconsin glaciation. So that was the end of the last ice age when there were still mammoths and mastodons in this part of the world, and when archaeologists believe the first humans started to enter this part of the world. It's about 160 kilometers long. Like I mentioned, it runs from the Niagara Escarpment to Port Hope. It's a giant ridge made of glacial materials that was deposited by the melt of the glaciers and these sort of underground streams of water. And it's the location of a lot of freshwater aquifers. So it helps provide drinking water for over 250,000 people, but it's sometimes characterized as the rain barrel of Southern Ontario. So it helps store, clean, and provide rainwater for people in the GTA. So indirectly, millions of people's drinking water is held by the Oak Ridges Moraine. It's really significant landform here in Southern Ontario. But because it's located so close to the GTA, it's extremely vulnerable to development. So what do land trusts actually do? This is one of our biggest sort of PR or communications challenges with this organization, and that a lot of other land trusts experience as well. Not a lot of people really know what a land trust is or what we do. Even when I started out in this job at my interview, I remember sort of stumbling a little bit when I was asked that question. So no shame at all if anyone here is a little bit fuzzy. Land trusts are a type of environmental NGO, like I mentioned earlier. So we're a non-governmental organization, although we apply for government grants and sometimes we receive funding from the government. We're not a government agency. A lot of people think that we are like a regulatory body, so we get a lot of emails and phone calls asking if people can build a shed in their backyard if they live on the moraine, or leave a pile of horse manure on their property or what have you. We are not a government agency, a regulatory body. We have no say over any of that. We are a private organization. As I mentioned earlier in our introduction, we raise funds to purchase land. We have land donated to us. Those are the properties we own outright, our conservation reserves. Most of our properties are easements. So somebody might still live on their property. They might even farm part of it, but at least part of that property is set aside by law to be protected as habitat for wildlife. So that means that part of your property you can't develop, you can't build on, you can't cut down trees. So most of our properties are easements. We have 68 protected properties. So the Oak Ridges Moraine Land Trust is a registered charity. It was founded in 2000. That was right around the time that there was a lot of development pressure in this part of the province. A lot of concerned citizens came together and said, hey, we want to make sure that this part of Southern Ontario remains protected. It's really important for groundwater. A lot of species at risk depend upon it. So today we have 68 protected properties. As I mentioned, most of them are easements. That works out to 2,167 hectares or 5,357 acres. So a huge amount of land we protect. And we have 4 full-time staff in charge of all of that. That's why we have a volunteer program and why we're asking you to donate your time and effort, because it is a lot of land to monitor, to steward, a lot to take care of for our people. So why would anyone actually want to volunteer with the Oak Ridges Moraine Land Trust? It's a great question. I think that for me, the thing that's most exciting is the possibility to join a community of people who are united by a shared love of nature and that shared desire to conserve these outdoor spaces. So it's a great way to meet new people, people with similar values, similar interest in the environment. And I really want to sort of under my tutelage guide this volunteer program to really be a social space and a place of community. And I'm really excited to launch new volunteer recognition and celebration initiatives and events and things like that. I want people to enjoy themselves. It shouldn't feel like a chore. Because oftentimes we're asking people to, go out into the middle of the woods and look for invasive species or, pull weeds and things like that. It is labor, it is, physical work. So the more fun you can have doing it and the more connections you can make with other people while doing it, I think that's huge. You're helping the environment. We live in a time of, great environmental crisis, and it can seem really overwhelming. It's something I really struggle with, is the sense of against sort of the massive scale of things like climate change and biodiversity loss. Like, how can I help? What can I do? Um, Helping to maintain these, nature reserves, helping to teach people about the environment, all of these initiatives, they help, even if it's in a very small way. It's a really tangible way that you can help. It's a great way to get outside, get out on the land, and experience nature too. You get access to these private nature reserves if you're, a property steward that other people don't get to go to. You might get to see, some interesting wildlife and plants that are a little bit harder to track down in this part of the world, that are able to sort of thrive in these protected properties. I know I've seen some really cool things while doing some monitoring and stewarding for this organization in the past, year and a half while I worked here. Like I mentioned earlier, we have all sorts of volunteer appreciation initiatives that we have planned. And more than anything else, it's fun. And it's nice to spend time with similar people and get to meet new people and you know, feel like you're making a difference. So there's a lot of great reasons why you'd want to volunteer with us. Here are some of the positions that we're offering. And again, we're always open to feedback. We're always open if people have ideas on other ways they want to contribute, if you have a particular skill set. For instance, we had somebody reach out to us recently who's a law student who's interested in environmental law stuff, asking if there's anything that they could help us with. And, we've had people reach out to us and say, hey, I'm really passionate about climate change. Is there, can I do some sort of like communications job or some sort of advocacy role around climate change? So if you don't see something listed here that you think might be valuable to us, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll have my email address in the presentation at a few points, and I'll throw it in the chat towards the end when we do the Q&A. But we have our nature reserve guardians. We have our education leads for both in-person events and webinars, online events. We have public engagement. Invasive species removal is a huge one. We're always happy to accept photos and videos that people donate. And we have the native seed collection program, which I referenced earlier. So I'll go through each of these jobs and we'll talk a little bit about what they entail. And I like to think that there's a position that appeals to everybody. So some of these jobs, they have different requirements for them to, and we try to make it as accessible as possible. If you have, mobility challenges, for instance, or accessibility needs, there's some jobs where it would be it may present more challenges if you were going to choose those positions, but we'll do absolutely everything we can to accommodate people. There's some of them that are easier if you're more extroverted, doing all that sort of public facing, public engagement, and education stuff is easier if you like people, if you like talking to people, if you like public speaking. And then there's a lot of them are related around what people's sort of background knowledge is. So if you understand, aspects of the local ecology, if you're a birder, if you're really knowledgeable about birds, or if you know about insects or, native plants, those are all really valuable things. If you know about, tracking, for instance, those things are really helpful for people who are interested in volunteering in an education capacity. Working outside is a big one. A lot of these jobs require people to work outside. So if you not somebody who enjoys being outdoors, there's some jobs that will probably appeal to you more than others. Yeah, the ability to recognize invasive plants as well. Although we have a lot of training materials that we're happy to share, and I'm happy to help people out with that sort of stuff. All these sorts of things can be assets, and I really like to think that there's something for everybody. And if you feel like, again, like there's a volunteer position that you'd like to see, or if there's things we can do to help, meet your needs or any, specific requirements or requests you may have, then yeah, feel free to reach out and we'll do our best to make something that works for you. So the first position I'm going to talk about today is the Nature Reserve Guardians. So the Nature Reserve Guardians, they monitor our protected properties. So particularly, you're looking for signs of human impact, trespassing. One of our nature reserves, for instance, somebody illegally set up a commercial paintball camp on one of the protected properties. This was a forest not open to the public, lots of signs saying no trespassing. People spent a lot of time and money and plywood setting up these sort of like, little like towers and obstacles and things like that, and where, having people go through with paintball guns. So one of our nature reserve guardians spotted that and flagged it, and we were able to do the work to remove all that stuff. You're also doing things like recording plant and animal observations. Sometimes you might be removing invasive species. Particularly important, I would say, when you're recording plant and animal observations is to note any invasive plants and things like that. Whether the situation is stable, whether it's getting worse, whether there's new things starting to move in, what direction they might be coming from, all that sort of stuff. All that goes into a monitoring report. It's a pretty brief document that you fill out. And we only ask that you go out a few times a year. And part of that job as well is communicating when you'll be there. So we'll talk about it a little bit later in this presentation, but we ask that you send us an email when you get there and when you are ready to leave, just so we know that you're safe. And we have a volunteer safety checklist that we send out for each visit as well. So here's a few of our nature reserves. If any of these are close to you, or any of these, are sort of in your neck of the woods, please feel free to email me or message me if you think you might be interested in helping to monitor any of these places. So some of these are the two that are in italics there, Emery and Ferguson. Those have sort of special access considerations. So those ones, if you're interested in, visiting or monitoring either of those, we can chat about that. It'll help coordinate that with my supervisor. But I've been to a lot of these. And there's some really beautiful properties. So all those four pictures taken there were all sort of observations of different, plants, animals, fungi that we've spotted at some of these places over the years. So if you decide to become a steward with us, then you'll have the opportunity to visit these places, which aren't normally open to the public. A few of our nature reserves have wonderful volunteers that are already monitoring them. So the Beaton Heritage Forest in Beaton, we have a great team called Graves for Greens, which is a group of retired people who are interested in caring for the earth, led by a person named John Wilson. And they're monitoring the Beaton Heritage Forest. And our McLeod property as well. We have a handful of people who are Chris and Melissa, who are helping take care of that place and doing a really wonderful job. So located in beautiful Schaumburg, Ontario, We have the Maple Cross King Nature Reserve and the Starcliff Nature Reserve. So I mentioned earlier the Maple Cross Nature Reserve is the one where we have a lot of our events. And the Starcliff Nature Reserve is where we have our offices. So it's one that I go to about once a week, twice a week. Very familiar with, but it's a really cool spot. It's right on the moraine. We have a Kettle Lake, which is an interesting glacial landform when, big chunks of ice were left behind by the glaciers when they were retreating. Back when the moraine was being formed, that water all melted away and they would leave, these huge sort of dents in the landscape that would become lakes. So we have a really beautiful Kettle Lake at that property. We get things like painted turtles and wood frogs and hooded mergansers. There's all sorts of wonderful plants and animals we get out there. Um, so if somebody's interested in being a property steward for our offices in the Starcliff Nature Reserve, that's something we're very much open to. The one challenge, or not challenge maybe, but the one consideration with the Maple Cross Nature Reserve in Schaumburg is the former owner lives on the site and helps to maintain it for us as part of the agreement of them being there. But they require 24-hour advance notice for access to the site. So I just have to call the former owner who lives out there and let her know that somebody's coming. And we do that for all the events we have out there. And it's never been an issue. She has a really big, nice dog as well. So if you're scared of dogs, that also might not be a great choice, but it's a really beautiful property. Um, this particular property, also located in Schaumburg, the Radvani Nature Reserve, presents an interesting challenge because it is a wetland off the side of the highway. So it requires a kayak for access. There's no way to access it. Like there's no trails or anything like that. You might be able to do it in hip waders if you're brave, but we really recommend something like a kayak for access to that. So that's a really special situation. Um, we looked into having people use drones to monitor it as well, but there was all sorts of sort of regulatory hoops to jump through with that. So I don't think the drone option will work. But if you're interested in kayaking around a wetland or walking around in hip waders, we have an amazing opportunity for you in Schaumburg. This is my favorite sort of part of the volunteer program and part of my job, is the in-person events. Um, so it all comes back to what people are knowledgeable about, what people are interested in. We've had, in the time that I've been here, we've had native plant identification and collection field days. We've had birding walks. We've had tree ID walks. We had a spider walk. We had moth nights. I led for Pride Month, a queer ecology walk. So we've had, over the years, we've had tracking events, things, oriented around insects. So just about anything you can imagine related to local ecology and natural history. We're happy to, have in-person events oriented around. Most of them, like I mentioned, are at Maple Cross and Schaumburg. We can also do events at our offices at the Starcliff Nature Reserve. There's a pretty steep hill there, so it's not always the most accessible site, depending on people's, mobility needs. The Beaton Heritage Forest as well. We have events out there, and we've had them at places like what is it? The Nobleton Tract, which you can see in that photo in the lower right-hand side. That birding walk was held there. But there's a few properties that we co-manage with organizations like the TRCA that we'd be able to have in-person events at as well. Another area where you can be an education lead is through our webinars. So this past year, we had 12 different webinars. And as you can see from these thumbnails, they're on a wide variety of topics. So in the time that I've been here, we've had them on things like winter plant identification, identifying native shrubs and trees, identifying native wildflowers, native grasses. We've had a winter birding webinar, a spring birding webinar, a fall birding webinar. We might be sort of, running out of months to do birding webinars on. We've had the bats of Ontario. We've had one on coexisting with coyotes. I led one for Pride Month all about queer ecology. So all sorts of topics, just about anything you can imagine. And like I had in the opening slides, we have a whole bunch of ones coming up soon. We have groundwater coming up. We have one on animal courtship. So much like the in-person events, the world's your oyster. Just about anything related to to ecology and local wildlife we'd be open to. Most of them get recorded and posted to our YouTube channel. Every once in a while, a presenter sort of declines, and usually it has to do with sort of personal safety concerns about having their videos of themselves out there on the internet or having their name out there. Um, Typically, they're on Tuesday nights from 7 to 8 p.m., just like we're doing right now, but we're flexible and they can be on, just about any night of the week. We used to do them before I worked at the Land Trust. We had a bunch of them that were sort of like weekday, like midday lunch and learns that were about half an hour. Um, they're through Zoom, and we have a moderated Q&A, just like we're having this evening after the presentation. So if you're the presenter of a webinar, people will post in the chat their questions or in the Q&A box, and I will sort of look through them and make sure that they're all appropriate, and I'll read them to you and help keep people on track if they're starting to go over time or what have you. Yeah, leading the webinars has been one of my favorite parts of this job, and it's really nice that they get to, for the most part, exist on our YouTube channel afterwards. And sometimes, we get hundreds and thousands of people watching them after the fact, and we've had people join us from all over the States, from the UK. I think we even had somebody on a call once from Australia, which is truly bizarre. I'm not sure how they found out about, that we were doing this. But it's really nice to be able to reach people on such a large scale. It's one really positive thing that sort of came out of how we changed our programming with the start of lockdown in 2020. And it's something that we've kept doing ever since because it has been such a positive thing. It's a very similar role as public engagement. So we like to table at events. We don't do it as much as we used to, but it's something I think we'd like to expand and do a little bit more of. We used to go to a lot of farmers markets. This past year, we went to the Richmond Hill Maple Syrup Festival, local tree planting events, anything like that. Events at libraries, senior centers, any kind of, like community market. We're going to try to get out to a few different pride parades and pride festivities this June. So we set up a display. We have different activities that we run for kids. They can make their own moraine out of like ice cream and marshmallows and things like that. We have lots of handouts, lots of literature, like coloring pages, information about the moraine, information about our organization, and then you answer questions. So if you were doing this kind of volunteer position, you would, you'd swing by our offices in Schaumburg. You'd get the table and the tablecloths and all the literature and handouts and everything like that, and would set them up and present for a couple hours at whatever maple syrup festival or what have you were tabling at, and then wrap up at the end of the day. So that is an option as well. And if anybody here is involved with any of those kinds of, farmers markets or, community events or things like that, and is interested in having us table, or if you know anything in your community where you think, wow, the Oak Ridges Moraine it would be excellent if you came out here and participated in it, then please let me know as well. We're always looking for new avenues, new events to be a part of, especially reaching communities that we may not have reached in the past. This is a big one, invasive species removal. So this is sort of a cornerstone of our volunteer program. It's a part, like I mentioned earlier, of the Nature Reserve Guardian role, but it's sort of its own category. We're particularly targeting garlic mustard and European buckthorn, but other species too, like dog strangling vine, tree of heaven, goutweed, periwinkle are found at our nature reserves. We have all sorts of resources we've created over the years to help people identify these plants, as well as how to identify native plants that we want to keep and don't want to remove. Each year we have, two, usually sometimes three garlic mustard pulls at our Starcliff Nature Reserve in Schaumburg. So usually we attract a lot of high school students who need their volunteer hours completed, but it's a variety of people that come out for that sort of thing. And it's all manual removal. So we're not using any kind of herbicides. We are using equipment, things like loppers, clippers, and anyone who has chainsaw certification, that is a huge plus, particularly with some of those larger, shrubs. When things like tree of heaven and European buckthorn start to move from shrubs to small trees, it can be really hard using that kind of like manual equipment to remove them. So anyone with chainsaw certification or any friends with chainsaw certification or training, that is a huge plus. That's something we're always looking for. Photography and videography. All these great photos here were taken by a volunteer called Matt Ireland, who's led a webinar with us, led a guided walk, and allowed us to use a lot of his photos on our website and social media and things like that, which is huge. Um, yeah, we have a lot of amazing plants, animals, landscapes here on the Moraine. But even, with me being the sort of full-time communications person, we don't always have the time to go out and get videos and photos of them. But we like to use these kinds of photos on our website, our social media channels. We put together a lot of sort of promotional videos or videos for particular fundraising campaigns. And it's always helpful to have access to this kind of footage and these kinds of photos. And of course, we're happy to credit people too. So if you're interested in sharing any of your photos or videos with us, that's very helpful. So the native seed collection, this is one I talked a little bit about earlier. So this is part of our Kirtland's Warbler Habitat Restoration Initiative. So out in Northumberland County, we have these two properties, the Maple Cross Featherstone Nature Reserve and the Hillcrest Nature Reserve. And we're restoring them to this rare oak pine habitat, which has largely been erased from the landscape. It's been lost to development. A lot of it was converted to agricultural lands. There's this bird called the Kirtland's Warbler. At one point in the early 70s, there was only about 200 pairs of them left in the world. It was one of the most endangered animals alive, but now there's hundreds of thousands of them. And they're doing so well in Michigan, which is, the core of their breeding range. So they're actually taken off the U.S. endangered species list about 4 or 5 years ago. But they're still endangered in Canada. They breed every once in a while in Canada. There was a project in Simcoe County with Simcoe County Forests a few years ago to restore a property called Packard Tract out by Barrie for the Kirtland's Warbler, and a few of them have visited it over the years, but none of them have bred there yet. And so we're hoping to bring this bird back to Ontario, but as I mentioned earlier, it's going to help benefit a lot of other species, things like the eastern hognose snake, the grasshopper sparrow, even like the short-eared owl. And it's really challenging to get enough seeds to restore, these huge, areas of land to this habitat. In the US, there's a lot of infrastructure around habitat restoration and, selling native seeds. There's a lot of commercial nurseries and seed companies. And we just don't have it on the same scale here in Ontario, which makes it really tricky to restore a site this size. We're now two sites these size. So we're really depending on volunteers. Moving forwards, we're only going to target a few species, things like common milkweed, acorns for oaks, because there's a lot of challenges around identifying native plants. And we want to make sure that we don't accidentally introduce anything that shouldn't be there, any invasive species in particular. So more details will be forthcoming. You can reach out to me if you're interested in doing this at all, and we can chat. It's also important if you're going to do a native seed collection that you have permission from the landowners. So there's a lot of places like hydro corridors and ditches at the sides of the road where there's like legal access. But it's not great if you're going into a city park or a provincial park or anything like that, or somebody's like backyard, taking the seeds from their plants. And then we have to make sure as well that they're not cultivars or garden varieties. They have to be like the native populations of those plants. So there's a bunch of considerations there. Something else that we're working on right now that's kind of fun that I've been in charge of is this educational display at our Starcliff Nature Reserve in Schaumburg. So we've turned a room in the basement into this sort of museum. So we have all sorts of, like taxidermy birds that people have donated. We've had people donate insects that they've collected, taxidermy fish from, somebody's father or grandfather, all sorts of shells, fossils, pelts, taxidermy, just about anything you can name. It's important to consider, though, that some of these things like bird skins are held under federal permits. So we don't want you breaking the law and finding a dead bird at the side of the road and stuffing it and donating it to us. So if you have any questions about the legality of any of these things, then please, yeah, reach out to me and ask. We recently had somebody at the Kingston Field Naturalist donate a bunch of their bird skins to us. So these are dead birds that have been stuffed, but we also have a few from them which are frozen birds that haven't been prepared yet. So if anybody's interested in taxidermy or preparing bird skins, there is an opportunity there. It's a little bit grisly and it's definitely not for everyone, but if anyone has a background in that or an interest, please let me know. That would be appreciated. And the hopes is that eventually school groups will be able to come view this educational display, that we'll have a field trip program that's still in development right now. And when we have people come through to do guided walks and events, that they'll be able to see it as well. Yeah, it's been really fun. We have some cool stuff. So a few additional opportunities. The deck at our offices in Schaumburg is in desperate need of repair. If you know any generous carpenters or if you enjoy carpentry yourself, that would be a big boon to us. It's something that we've been looking to get done for a long time, but unfortunately, as a nonprofit, we don't always have the funding to hire, a contractor and come through and do something like that. Something else, if you're interested in carpentry, is we're always interested in nest boxes. You can make, something like this screech owl nest box. That was a few years ago at our offices in Schaumburg. That owl was there for one day and never came back, unfortunately. Decided it didn't like that particular box, I guess. But wren boxes, bluebird boxes, all those sorts of things are a fun woodworking project, and we definitely benefit from having them at our properties. And like I mentioned earlier, if you have any ideas, please feel free to get in touch. We're always open to suggestions. So how do you become a volunteer? Well, most of you have already applied on our website. So you've let us know what positions you're interested in. At that point, you should receive a welcome package with the volunteer orientation package. So I will send that out. We just put together recently an updated volunteer orientation guide, which should be ready in the next few days. So that will go out to everyone who's on this call and everyone who's registered recently as being interested in volunteering. At that point, you complete the waiver. We have a standard volunteer waiver, and then I'll start emailing you when there's shifts available. And you can start signing up for shifts, and then you can volunteer with us. So as I mentioned earlier, we have the volunteer waiver that everybody gets to sign. Depending on the task, we have a confidentiality agreement form. So if you're doing anything that's like legally sensitive or dealing with species at risk, which are at risk of poaching, information that's sensitive like that, you'll be sent that form to fill out as well. And each time you go out into the field, like I talked about with the Nature Reserve Guardians, we have a new volunteer safety checklist for people to fill out. And when you go unsupervised to any of these places, because if you're a nature reserve guardian or some of those volunteer opportunities, you'll be asked to go unsupervised to some of these places without a staff member with you. Please send us an email when you arrive and when you're ready to leave and go home safely. So with the volunteer orientation package, the main thing you'll be getting is the volunteer orientation handbook. There's a few other, resources that happy to send out as well. The abridged field safety guide and the field work safety guidelines, all that sort of thing. But that volunteer orientation handbook, if you haven't received it already, I will be sending it to you sometime in the next few days. We've just adopted a new computer program called Salesforce, which allows us to, manage things like our donations, and as well as our, like our campaigns that we have for fundraising. And it's through Salesforce that we started running our volunteer shifts and tracking. So if there is a volunteer opportunity, you'll receive an email with the option to sign up for shifts. So for instance, if there's a invasive species removal event, it could be one day with all the shifts are, noon to 4. And if we need 20 volunteers, there'll be 20 spots that you can sign up for. If that event is 2 days, December 1st and December 2nd, you'll have the option to sign up for a shift on the one day and a shift on the second day or both. And depending upon, like I said, the number of volunteers that we need, the number of shifts available, that'll all be included in that. So once you fill it out with your info, your name, your address, and everything like that, and you select your shift and your time, and you submit that, you'll receive a confirmation email, and then you show up on the day of and you volunteer. And on my end, I will track whether you actually showed up or not, and use that to collect the number of hours that people have volunteered and keep track of that. And as part of our sort of revamped volunteer programming, we're thinking that eventually people who have more volunteer experience may eventually get profiles on Salesforce and may be able to have access to that computer program as well. Although that's sort of a conversation for a little further down the road. Health and safety, always important stuff. The Oak Ridges Moraine Land Trust, we prioritize the health and the well-being of its staff and volunteers. That is absolutely paramount. There's no tolerance for any kind of hateful, intimidating, or discriminatory behavior. And there's no tolerance for any kind of harassment or violence. Um, Unfortunately, some of these issues around around the environment can be pretty divisive. So there's always a chance if you are tabling at a farmer's market or anything like that, that people could respond negatively. I think it's a greater risk when it's something like the Pride Month programming that we do. We have received a little bit of negative pushback on things like that. But for the most part, we're pretty lucky. We haven't, had to experience too many, negative encounters with, members of the public or, any kind of staff or volunteers. Um, but obviously, if you're ever in that situation and you're being made to feel uncomfortable, your safety is the top priority. And, you can fully remove yourself from that situation and make sure that you're safe. So we have a number of policies in place to protect our staff and volunteers. All that's included in the volunteer orientation guide. I can send, copies of all that to everybody as well. Those expanded, policies. Um, and you can always talk to me. We have an incident reporting form, but please feel free to reach out to me, Maxwell at oakridgesmoraine.org or outreach at oakridgesmoraine.org. If anyone's ever making you feel uncomfortable, or if you have encounter any challenges while you're out volunteering. Talk a little bit briefly about some of the equipment we have that we use. So our volunteers will be in safety vests. That's for pretty much everything. If you're a nature reserve guardian, we ask that you pick one up from us, or if you have one yourself, you may be able to use that one. And that just helps to identify you as a volunteer, helps make you visible. When we're out on walks, it's guided walks and activities. It's a good thing to have just so members of the public can identify you as somebody who's sort of in a leadership role. Helps make things easy. We ask that you have we used to ask for people to bring a GPS, and we have GPS units if people want them, but most phones now have, GPS, mapping on them. One of the guidelines we have, or one of the requirements we have on our volunteer safety checklist, is to make sure that your phone is fully charged. First aid kit is good to have as well. Good to have water with you, especially out in the summertime. We don't want people getting dehydrated. Appropriate footwear is very important. This is something in the past that I've suffered from, having the wrong shoes out in the field can be unsafe as well as uncomfortable. And then, like I mentioned earlier, when we're doing invasive species removal, there's lots of different pieces of equipment we could have, clippers, shovels, spades, loppers. We have this thing called an extractigator, which is like I don't even know how to describe it. It's like a pole that goes in the ground and it helps remove shrubs. So there's lots of different sort of gardening and horticultural equipment that we have at our offices that you're able to use. Some of the other resources we have that you'll have access to, we have a guide to the invasive species of the Oak Ridges Moraine. We have guide to species at risk, endangered and threatened species. We have a plant ID guide that we designed to help people doing native seed collection. And, there's a number of resources around that, lists of species that we're interested in collecting, things like this. So I'm happy to share any of those, and with some specific tasks and volunteer jobs, these may be helpful. All right, so I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I will open it up to questions if anybody has any questions. I will throw in the chat here my email. So if anybody's interested in reaching out to me, they can email me. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. Well, thank you very much, Saul. I appreciate the comment, and I look forward to being in touch with you. Yeah. Where do we find those resources? So Philip, I can email any of those to you that you're interested in seeing, things about native species, invasive species, anything like that. Just send me an email to the address that I put in the chat box there, and any of those that you're interested in, I can send to you. And I will send out, like I mentioned earlier, the updated volunteer orientation guide to everybody shortly. All right. Are there any more questions? Q&A. Let's see. Do we do any water or soil sampling? That is a good question. Not that I'm aware of. Um, that might be something that sort of on a case by case basis we may ask volunteers to do or ask volunteers to help out with, people who have that experience. Um, but yeah, the only time I think that we might do something like that is when we were doing sort of an initial assessment at a property before we acquire it. We might want to know some of that information. Ian asks, do you ever do prescribed burns? We've done one prescribed burn in our history, and that was at the Maple Cross Nature Reserve in Schaumburg, the one where we do a lot of our events. We did a prescribed burn, and then we did a whole bunch of sort of grassland planting following that. And we've had mixed success. That was before I started working with the Land Trust, maybe 3 or 4 years before I joined. But yeah, we have things like yellow savanna grass, big blue stem growing out there today. But there's also still a lot of the non-native species that we were hoping to help get rid of with that burn. So it's definitely something that we would be open to doing again in the future. I think that particular burn was also tied to a grant, with to collect the seeds or purchase the seeds for the following restoration work to put them in the ground. Um, so it's something that we could do in the future, but I don't think anything we have plans for in the immediate next little while. Somebody's asking me to put my email address back in the chat. I'll do that. Thank you, Leslie. All right. Do we have any more questions here tonight? All right. If not, I might start to wrap things up. But thank you all for joining me this evening. And again, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you all for spending the time. Let me try that one more time. Outreach at oakridgesmoraine.org. There we go. Does that work? Does everybody see the email address now? Perfect. All right. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out with me, and any comments on the wildfires. Um, Very bad. It's extremely sad what's happening out in Los Angeles right now. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, it can seem extremely overwhelming, the effects of climate change, and feel like there's very little that we can do in our lives to help impact it when it's happening on such a massive scale. But hopefully, these sorts of opportunities to engage with the environment and to teach people about environmental issues and do on the ground tangible things like removing invasive species. Hopefully that provides us a sense of hope and purpose in a challenging time, as well as reassures us that we are doing something, no matter how small. All right. Well, thank you all for joining me this evening. and enjoy the rest of your nights. And I'm sure I'll chat with you all soon. Bye now.